What's up, Vault Hunters? I'm SchviftyFive, and this is Ultimate Vault Hunters. You know him, you've watched him do unholy amounts of damage, and you love his cheerful demeanor while doing so. Moxsy is back in the hot seat to break down his world-famous Breaker Amara build. Does it live up to the title and do tons of damage? Or will Moxsy break under the pressure of trying once again to earn the title of Ultimate Vault Hunter? As always, thank you so much for tuning in and joining the conversation. Whether you're joining us on Twitch, YouTube, or Twitter, or listening along on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or Spotify, we thank you for tuning in and listening to the program. For those who want to watch Ultimate Vault Hunters as soon as it goes live, you can hear it first bi-weekly, Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific on Twitch and YouTube. Moxsy, welcome back. How's it going?
Good. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh my God, I'm so glad you're back. We got to play games recently. You played games with Dr. Lupo recently. How did that go? I heard that you broke his game.
Oh, yeah. It went very well. There was a moment in the stream where I wanted to show him something pretty cool. There is a interaction between the frozen snowshoe shield and a spark plug and bloodletter on Mo's that was actually discovered by Psychotic Wolf that I wanted to show off. That basically whenever you slam, you plant a spark plug in the ground. So the spark plug causes slide damage, and the snowshoe, whenever you're sliding, does a nova that heals you. And then there's the bloodletter class mod that healing will turn into shield. And basically you slam down once and it triggers like a ton of cryonovas. And we managed to crash his 2 PC setup. Pretty sure he's got 2 PCs. Yeah, it was just definitely peak of my career.
That was from Psychotic Wolf's Slam Cannon build, or is that something that was in
it's a variant of his Slam Cannon build that's just focused on slamming and not actually shooting at all, only slamming.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, I did see that clip, and that was pretty hilarious. He was just like, "Well, my game just crashed." Moxsy,
I was like, I might get in trouble for this.
I mean, I guess when you like overload the frames, it's always a hilarious moment. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool that you brought him something new and innovative that he'd never seen before. Speaking of which, we have something that is apparently also game-breaking, Breaker Amara. I'm ready to get into this build. Can you take us through the skill tree?
Absolutely. Before I explain the skill tree, there's like kind of an interaction that this build is based off of that the name comes from. So this interaction, it was discovered a while ago. There is an augment on Amara's tree called Revelation that is in the green tree. It is a Nova augment that basically says Mara's action skill now creates a Nova when it damages enemies, dealing damage to all nearby enemies. This Nova, as the base card damage, it's now 4,740, which doesn't sound like a lot of damage at all. However, when the Mayhem scaling was introduced, this also got Mayhem scaling, so it gets times 31 damage, which still isn't a lot of damage. But when you mix in holding a 390 weapon, and when you also add in the Mayhem scaling that Tithes That Bind got, which is around times 7 at the time of discovering this, and now scales with Mayhem damage and does even more damage. But basically what happens is, because I had help calculating this, but originally when I first tried this, it was hitting for crazy amounts of damage, and I didn't understand why. And now with calculated damage, every time that you grasp with this build, with the setup, you hit for over damage cap. So every single time you Phasegrasp, all of the enemies are hit for, at 60 was 1.4 billion damage. So it is now, I believe it does more than that, but it's absurd. And the only pieces of gear, I showed this off using white gear, and you don't need a shield, you don't need a grenade. Things that boost splash damage as passive rolls are nice, but pretty much with just some white gear and Amara's skill tree, you can hit for over damage cap, meaning that you one-shot everything in this game. Now, the idea for Game Breaker stemmed from this because I made a video showcasing this off. people were like, what's the point of hitting for that much damage? Everything would just die anyways. And there's a new thing that was introduced into the game called Groundbreaker that 25% of your non-melee damage is then done when you melee something. It procs all of the damage that you've done in the past however many seconds. And so the core loop of this build and the idea behind it, there's some variants and stuff like that that I'll cover. But the main idea is you grasp, you're going to hit for over damage cap. That gives you, because all of that damage is done by your action skill, which is then going to transfer to Groundbreaker. You can then shoot something like a Face Puncher, which will then have over 1 billion damage attached to it. And then your Face Puncher shot will one-shot anything. So it's kind of like
Wow.
Anything that doesn't have an immune phase gets one shot.
Wow.
It's pretty awesome. And what it leads to is this loop of just like absurd damage. Unfortunately, when you hit for over a damage cap, no number appears. So a lot of the times you just don't see any numbers, but things are just kind of vaporizing. And that and this interaction was what led, especially the synergy with Groundbreaker, led me to naming it Gamebreaker.
Wow. I mean, that skips ahead a little bit into our rotations, but we'll cover that again just a little bit later so we can make sure that everybody gets how it works, because I really want to make sure that people understand this, because this is a super cool build. But let's go ahead and start through the skill tree. You said we're going to start. This is an end game build. You wouldn't want to level like this, right?
End game build, yeah.
Okay. So you start with the green tree?
Yeah, starting with the green tree, we put 5 points into Root to Rise. This is a Face Puncher and action skill damage based build. Unfortunately, Personal Space, which is an amazing skill, doesn't work with the Face Puncher, so there's no point in putting any points here. So we're going to pick up the health, and we're going to be lifestealing with sustainment, so we don't need any points into clarity. Next up, we go Arms Deal. Now, Arms Deal is an amazing skill. It's going to give us splash damage and splash damage reduction. The Revelation Augment scales with splash damage are White Elephant stickies that we're going to be using scale with splash damage, and our Remnant Orb hits for splash damage. By the way, on top of everything, when you do over 1 billion damage, it'll trigger an Overkill Remnant Orb, which once again gets Mayhem scaling and splash damage, and we've hit into the trillions with this thing, which is very, very cool. So Arms Deal increases that as well. So that's really cool. Next up, we go into Mindfulness. Now, Mindfulness was where I put these new points with the level cap increase. Originally, we came down this tree and just put 1 point into find your center and then left. Now we can put points, these extra points, I put 3 into Mindfulness and 2 into Helping Hands. The reason 4 points into Mindfulness is because this build can rock 2 different setups, one for bossing, one for mobbing, and the bossing variant uses the driver class mod, which scales your damage off of your movement speed. Mindfulness gives more movement speed. And so the reason we're picking up Mindfulness is because it is going to increase our bossing setup damage by quite a fair bit. At 6 out of 3 points when we proc our movement speed, we're going to give out 300% increased damage.
Wow.
So really good picking up Mindfulness here. And that was a great addition with those new 5 points. The other 2 points I just put into Helping Hands. This build has absolutely no trouble doing damage. 0. So the only thing that can happen this time is going down. If you we didn't have like any sort of like real damage reduction besides Arms Deal. So I put some points into Helping Hands just to give us a little bit more damage reduction so that you can do your damage safely. Next up, the Blue Tree. For the Blue Tree, I go 5 into Do Harm because we're basing a lot of our damage off of action skill damage. Do Harm is amazing. And once again, that's going to be boosting the damage that Revelation does. It boosts the damage that Ties That Bind does. It boosts the damage that Remnant does. It works beautifully with full stacks of Do Harm on a Phase Zerker, 99 stacks. When you Phasegrasp an enemy, they'll get killed anyways, but Any damage that is done through ties that bind is multiplied by 83. So the damage scaling of this is ridiculous. So when you shoot, on top of doing billions of damage, when you shoot an enemy, the damage that they would take through ties that bind is absurd. So if you want to kill something really, really, really hard, like an unethical amount of damage, you shoot the billions of damage at the enemy that is grasped, which is not your main target, and then your main target that you want to kill is on the ground, ungrasped.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, ties that bind. It says on the skill description that it originally gets the enemies take like reduced damage through the ties, but with this setup, they actually take way, way, way more damage. So yeah, sometimes grasping an enemy next to the one that you want to kill is the good way to do it.
Interesting.
Next up, there's in the blue tree, there's a lot of things that don't really help us. So because we are focused on melee damage, there's a lot of like gun skills and stuff like that, and fire rate, which doesn't really impact the face puncher. So one of the things that I go for is fast hands for reload speed, weapon swap speed, and mode swap speed. It's just nice to have. 1 point into violent tapestry as another way to build up rush stacks. Nothing's gonna survive being dotted, so it doesn't really matter. But having those stacks of violent tapestry is another way to build up rush stacks, which will actually impact our damage. So that's nice. Transcend is a beautiful skill on Amara. It doesn't say that it stacks twice, but it actually stacks twice, giving us plus 54% critical hit damage, and it gives us a ton of accuracy. And when you're shooting a face puncher, it's got 14 pellets, that accuracy to land all of your stickies on the head, plus getting 54% crit damage on top of that. Really, really good.
Why does it stack twice? How does it stack twice?
Using your action skill twice. The capstone of Mystical Assault Tree avatar allows you to cast your action skill twice. And this skill, when it says whenever you use your action skill, you get plus 20% crit, 27% crit, 38 accuracy. When you do it twice, which is what we do for our boss kills, you're going to supercharge your character with plus 54% crit damage on top of everything else, which is great.
This is crazy.
Then we're going into Restless. Restless, once again, we're spamming our cooldown or action skills. So having action skill cooldown, super, super important. Ascendant, all action skill augments gain increased effects. This is going to give our revelation damage plus 25% increased damage. That is calculated after already doing 1.4 bill. So it's just nice on top of that. Even more damage. Laid Bare is multiplicative damage increase. So it's really good to have whenever we go into a bossing scenario. When you're just one-on-one with the boss, you always want to hit your boss with your action skill. So like sometimes, for example, if you're fighting Grave Ward, this is mainly a Ties That Bind build. You can't actually Ties That Bind Grave Ward. The thing doesn't work on him. So I'll switch to Phasegrasp just to proc Laid Bare, which is going to give that multiplicative damage increase. Then all of your damage will just be way better. So in terms of like using your action skill, sometimes I'll switch it up for enemies that you can't actually grasp, which there's only a few of, but proccing that on bossing is really, really nice. Next up, Remnant. Remnant is uncapped overkill. It is one of the only things in this game that gives you uncapped damage. When, for example, you hit with, the reason that we use the face puncher in this build, for example, is if I hit with my action skill for 1 billion damage, the weapon that I shoot a bullet out of, if I'm using a weapon, let's say I'm using a monocle, if I hit for 1.4 billion damage and then I shoot a monocle, the monocle's overkill is only ×5 its base weapon damage. So it would only, no matter how hard I hit an enemy, the overkill that is generated using a weapon that shoots a bullet would only be ×5 of that weapon's maximum damage on its base card. So that's not good, and that's why we use the face puncher, because the face puncher will proc Groundbreaker, and that is uncapped damage. Remnant is the same, it is uncapped damage. So if I hit an enemy for 1 billion damage, for example, they're going to take that remnant orb will be generated with 999 million, for example, if they're like a 1 million base enemy. That damage is then multiplied by all of our it's multiplied by 390, so it's going to get times 4. It's multiplied by action skill damage, which is Remnant gives, I think, times 7. It's going to get all of our splash damage increases, and this is what allows us to hit for trillions with this build. Now, you can't actually see trillions, but if you go into the EchoCast, if you're watching someone through the EchoCast, it actually records all the damage that they do. So we have hit, I believe it was like 13 trillion using this build. So Remnant, very, very cool skill. Little inconsistent when it actually lands, or if it actually lands, but when it does land, it's just cool.
That's awesome.
And then for the last points in the blue tree, we have Awakening and Avatar. Awakening is going to increase our rush stack effectiveness. We're using, this is mainly for do harm, because do harm is action skill damage, and giving Awakening is just plus 30% increased effectiveness of that. It's whatever you take action skill damage, multiply that by like 0.3 or whatever, and good thing. And then Avatar is our last pickup. It's going to give us more rush stacks, which is more damage, more cooldown, and allows us to double proc things like Transcend so that we can get that increased crit damage.
Wow.
Red tree.
Oh my gosh, you said the blue tree wasn't even that exciting, and like here we are. You're like, okay, sorry, this is amazing.
Blue tree's cool. Red tree, so first off, we pick up Anima. The only reason we pick up Anima, like I said, dots don't really matter, but when we're using our bossing setup, which is the driver, it's going to proc a dot on us when we use our action skill, and that is our 300% increased damage, period, is however long we're dotted, because however long we're dotted is how long we stay fast, and Anima is just going to increase the duration of that by double. So we get our damage buff for longer, which is why we pick up Anima. It's not for actually like dotting enemies, it's for dotting ourselves and having it stay on us longer. Steady hands, handling and accuracy. We're using the Face Puncher. Once again, Face Puncher, not the most accurate gun, but we're getting this plus 31 accuracy. We're getting 36 accuracy from fast hands stacked. We get a ton of accuracy and are able to like nail headshots, which is great because the Face Puncher doesn't crit. It is a melee weapon. It doesn't crit, but the White Elephant stickies that we're using as our artifact, when we talk about that, those do crit, and that is why we pick up crit bonuses and accuracy bonuses so that all of those shots can crit. We pick up Infusion. Infusion is going to convert your damage. Now, the Face Puncher does melee damage, so you wouldn't think that it would need Infusion, because we are picking up Illuminated Fist, which reads Amara gains increased melee damage, and her melee damage is converted to her action skill element. The Face Puncher still does do some gun damage, the listed gun damage that is on the weapon, so picking up Infusion just gives us a little bit more damage because we do more damage with elemental damage than we do with non-elemental damage. On top of that, Tempest for more elemental damage, increased shock damage. Dread is gun damage. I use Dread as a reload. If you kill enemies while Phasegrasp is active, Dread will automatically reload your weapon. The more time that we can spend shooting, the higher our DPS is, and so Dread's a really great pickup. And lastly, the main reason we came into this tree pretty much is sustainment, 4% lifesteal off of any damage that we dealt. We're hitting for a lot of damage, so 1 point into sustainment is more than enough to keep us alive.
Cool.
That's the tree.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So this is a lot to take in. You've thrown a lot of math at me. Just a side note, like how did you get all of these numbers? And where did you get them all from?
Great question. So I like my main thing in this game is moving skills around and testing things and seeing what does and what can give us the most damage. The actual number crunching of it, I had to give a shout out to a guy named Prismatic, who is super awesome member of the community. He does a lot of posts in the Gearbox forum of damage formulas, and I presented him with this. I was like, hey, I'm hitting damage cap with Phasegrasp. I don't really understand why, and I need to break it down for my audience. can you help me crunch these numbers? And we popped into Desmo's calculator and got all of the things right, and we're able to tally it up to what is actually giving us 1.4 billion every time we Phasegrasp.
That's awesome. Cool. That's a great shout out. It's always nice to have community members to help you out. I had somebody at the very beginning of my FLAC career give me a couple of pointers and where to put my points, and it just changed my life. So that's awesome. I'm glad you have somebody like that. Cool. Okay, so let's get through the build. What augments for your action skill do you take?
So I use Revelation for most of it. There is a bossing and mobbing setup. The mobbing setup is you use Revelation because Revelation is what is going to trigger that crazy damage when you Phasegrasp. However, for bossing, we're using a 390 anointed weapon, which is the face puncher. And when you shoot at a boss with a face puncher, because I said you use your action skill to hit the boss. If it's for example, Grave Ward doesn't have any friends to Phasegrasp nearby. So how do you kill a Grave Ward if you can't trigger that Phasegrasp to do all that damage? What you do for Grave Ward is you phase cast him, and we'll switch to the driver. But I use something like Soul Sap as an augment because I don't want Grave Ward to be below 90% health when I shoot at him with my face puncher. Because if he is, then I lose all of that 390, which is just times 4 damage on top of everything. So for soul enemies, I'll switch to Soul Sap. It's just being safe, because if you do drop them below 90 before you can do your big damage hit, you're gonna lose times 4 damage on them.
Yeah. Would you say the 390 is better than a consecutive hits face puncher?
For this, absolutely. 390, part of the reason this all became so crazy is because 390 impacts almost every damage source that we're using. Ties that bind, any damage that's done through ties that bind is multiplied by 4 when you're holding a 390 weapon. That's why this build it doesn't, I was showing with a white weapon, you can do this damage because it has a 390 anoint. That is a big thing, because all of that damage is going to get multiplied by 4. But on top of that, your white elephant stickies will also get multiplied by 4, which they wouldn't with consecutive hits. So 390 is, in terms of gear for this build, 390 anointed face puncher is the main requirement.
All right.
That is an absolute must. And the comments that I get when it's hey, I'm not doing as much damage, I ask, hey, are you using 390 face punch? And they're like, no, I'm using face puncher with something else. That's definitely the keystone kind of piece.
And where can we get the face puncher?
Muldrock the Anointed drops the face puncher.
Oh, thank you.
6.
Thank you. Okay, so just to be clear with what you said earlier, this build is capable of doing trillions of damage with a T.
Yes. Yeah.
That's insane. Okay, so for players that don't know or are not familiar with the mechanic, what is Rush?
Oh, okay. So rush stacks are something that you generate as an Amara player if you respect into either Do Harm or Violent Tapestry. They are stacks that build up from you doing actions that'll then give you a passive bonus when you trigger your action skill. You do not get more rush stacks when you have, it says, for example, Do Harm, it says max rush stacks plus 10, Violent Tapestry max rush stacks plus 10. Both of those together give you 10. One of them gives you 10. They don't give you 20 together. Avatar will give you 20, and then Phasegrasp gives you plus 5 on top of that. And they are basically a way to stack up your either your reload speed, your action skill damage, or your status effect damage. One of the class ones that this build uses is the Phasegrasp, which gives you damage and cooldown based on your rush stacks, which having them is really great to have.
Okay, and how would you say that Rush factors into this build?
So rush stacks are great when there's something in this game called fake grasping, basically aiming at the ground or in the air. When you grasp if you're using a Phasegrasp, you can never get more than 25 stacks of rush, but while doing that, you can get 99 stacks of do harm, which will give you that. It's like, I think it's around like 99 stacks of do harm, I think is like times 10 on your action skill, which you can grasp up. So that all those damage calculations are calculated at 99 stacks of do harm, because that is the max action skill damage that you could achieve at 99 stacks.
Wow. Okay. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but just to go over it again, what would you say the main rotation of this build is? And I know it's going to be different. You said for mobbing versus bossing, and Graveward might be different. So what would you say? I don't know, mobbing. What's the mobbing rotation?
So mobbing rotation is you're going to, you should first Phasegrasp, which will proc your annoyance, and with how this works, for example, we use, even though we're doing melee damage, there's like 200 phase slam melee, there's 100 melee. We don't use those because Groundbreaker as a damage gets anointments. So the plus 50% like fire damage or shock damage or whatever anointment you're using is going to compound with your Groundbreaker proc, which is once again a lot of damage, and so you Phasegrasp, that's going to proc all those things for you. Then you grasp a group of enemies, and realistically you probably won't have to shoot at the group of enemies that you just grasped. They should all die. If they don't, you can use a shot, but that'll give you your Groundbreaker proc. You then have a ton of damage built up. You can then shoot one shot a bunch of enemies and then use your action skill again to then build that damage up, and then shoot a few times, do it again, and all your sources of damage will just keep adding onto your Groundbreaker proc. For example, when you Phasegrasp, you're going to proc Groundbreaker damage. Your Face Puncher will then use that Groundbreaker damage. That overkill will hit for billions. That'll trigger a Remnant Orb, for example. That'll then give you another Groundbreaker proc, because Remnant Orbs will hit for billions and doesn't count as melee damage. So that'll give your Face Puncher another boost of damage. You can shoot, grasp, and it leads to just kind of everything dying.
Cool. What about for bossing?
So bossing, we switched from the Phasegrasp to the driver. Now, the reason for that is driver's just more damage than a Phasegrasp for bossing, but the interaction, there's like a separate interaction that was kind of made for a different build that we've now incorporated into this one. The driver dot, when you're holding a 390 anointed weapon, is going to hurt you more, and that self-damage actually triggers Groundbreaker. So Groundbreaker is any damage that you do is going to then feed into your next melee. Your self-damage from grasping in the air or using your action skill feeds into damage, and that's why this build is able to one-shot any like single target boss. A lot of the bosses in the new DLC, not to say any spoilers, but are alone, and you have to do a ton of damage on them. This build works really well for that, because you're going to grasp or use your action skill. You're going to give yourself a Groundbreaker proc that is going to multiply by 390. That'll then hit them, and then there's a delayed explosion, which is your white elephants that have been juiced up by all of our skills, all of our talents, all of our gear, that will on their own hit for millions and millions and millions of damage.
Cool. What's the first class mod that you were using for mobbing?
Phasegrasp.
So use the Phasegrasp. You couldn't use that. I mean, could you use that on bossing, or
yes.
like, could you like stack rush, or like how would you do that? Is that possible?
So you can use the Phasegrasp for bossing, but I wouldn't recommend it on bosses that they don't spawn any ads or enemies. For example, like Phasegrasp is amazing against Wotan. When Wotan splits, there's a top half and a bottom half. You can grasp them, and it'll one-shot both the top half and the bottom half.
Awesome. So, and somebody like Trant or something.
Trant also spawns enemies. You can grasp an enemy next to Tron, and Tron will get one shot.
Grave Ward, no.
Grave Ward, no, because there's nothing that you can link to Grave Ward, so that you can just driver proc, run at Grave Ward, shoot, and then run away, and Grave Ward will get one shot.
Cool. All right. So pretty necessary to have both of the class mods on you when you're playing with this build.
Yes. Realistically, just using one is fine in both scenarios. The driver does mobbing fine. The Phasegrasp does bossing fine. And these were originally two different builds. The driver self-dot giving Groundbreaker was an interaction discovered by a guy named Commander Keen, who he originally found that. Shout out to him. Awesome streamer. And this build, they were two different, and I kind of morphed them into one, which then you can use both class mods, driver for bossing, Phasegrasp for mobbing.
Fantastic. Okay. Let's move on. What damage builds exist out there that could compare in numbers to this build? Probably one of yours, I'm considering. I'm guessing, because Damage Nation.
The only thing that comes close to it is probably Mo's Minesweeper builds. Mo's right now with Short Fuse and Skagden, both of those get Mayhem scaling. Fire in the Skagden says it does plus 15% bonus incendiary damage. It's actually getting 492% bonus incendiary damage on any single shot that does splash damage. The Minesweeper is another source of uncapped damage, and that's pretty much the only thing that can compete damage-wise with this. However, the Minesweeper is very inconsistent because it only has a 30%. It has a chance to proc and then a chance to crit, and so in terms of consistency, this is way more consistent because you could do it over and over and over again versus like doing a Minesweeper one-shot of bosses like this you're kind of relying on luck a little bit.
Right, like a 1 in 3 chance. You said 30%, so yeah, that's not super consistent.
Yeah, and it's then that has a 30% chance to proc, and then the grenade that procs again has another 30% chance. And when you get down to it, it's a little difficult. But yeah. Mo's as a character right now does a lot of damage. Not quite as much as this build, but should be very respected for damage.
Awesome. Okay, so while we have you here, how did this build fare overall with the True Guardian takedown?
True Guardian takedown, this build does just fine in. All those beefy enemies are not really an issue. The only issue that this build can come into trouble with is the two bosses, because they do have immunity phases. You can't one-shot them. So for the Guardian takedown, there is a shield that I'll switch to that is free damage that'll go through Ties That Bind that you can one-shot each of their phases with. That shield being the Stinger shield, which I do use sometimes on the Phasegrasp setup. It's a shield that when you trigger your action skill, if you have the action skill start anointment on it, does a melee Nova. That melee Nova, we're a melee build, and it does melee damage, and it does like 50 mil melee damage, but that'll also trigger White Elephants, which will then scale off of the damage that triggers it. And you can grasp an enemy, trigger the melee Nova, and then link that damage to the boss. And with that, it's not a problem getting like one-shotting each phase of the Guardian takedown.
Cool. So what class mod would you use on the Guardian takedown? Because I would assume Phasegrasp for crystal activation sections.
Yeah, I pretty much roll with the Phasegrasp for most of it,
for
to
the
be
whole
honest,
thing,
because there's always so many enemies around. The big negative to the driver class mod is it doesn't get nearly the amount of cooldown that the Phasegrasp does, and we're using our action skill to drive a lot of our damage, and so having that up more often is just going to lead to a lot cleaner run.
Okay, what would you feel like this build excels at the most?
Damage.
Destroying everything.
Yeah, it's now that it's kind of merged into one, it does both very, very well.
Cool.
I post a lot of build videos. At the beginning of each of my build videos, I have a star rating system where I rank the mobbing, the bossing, the gear requirements, and the survivability. And of my builds, this ranks in the absolute highest for of Amara, bossing and mobbing. The only thing that this build can have trouble with is like comparatively survivability, but Amara has ridiculous survivability, so like did rank it a little bit lower, but it's Amara. It's got lifesteal. It's just,
I was gonna say you've got some survivability. Dan, no, wasn't there a skill that you skipped that gives you health back? Maybe clarity.
Yeah, that's percentage health gen or health regen, and we don't need that because we have percentage lifesteal, and so that the return of that percentage health regen versus we picked up Root to Rise, which is just 40% increased max health. We're gonna have a larger health pool. We'll heal to full every single time, so it just makes us a little tankier having that larger health pool than a smaller health pool with percentage based health regen.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you for explaining that. I appreciate it. So about the skill tree, how do you feel about the 5 points recently added to the game alongside Psycho Krieg and the fantastic Fustercluck?
They're great. I was really happy with them. Like I said, this build was just like a few points away from being absolutely ideal. There's some Amara builds that weren't really affected by this, but any build that was there's like a little bit of a reach between getting blue tree avatar, red tree sustainment, which are both like really important, and also getting find your center, which means that you couldn't put any points into mindfulness. If you wanted to get those 3 talents, now you can. And so the overall damage of this build went up a significant amount because we're getting those extra points into mindfulness that we couldn't have before.
So you'd say that this build has been greatly improved, huh? Significantly, huh?
Yeah, it's great. That those 3 points give us about like 150% increased damage.
Wow.
So overall, good stuff.
Insane. So hypothetically, because we know our favorite number in Borderlands is 69. If you had 4 more points to add to your talent tree, where would they go?
Just 4 more points. I would either put them into Alacrity, just for we're going to be generating rush stacks anyways. Alacrity is just nice to have. Reload speed, quality of life thing. Yeah, that's probably where I'd put them, into Alacrity for quality of life, reload speed.
Cool. What weapons and gear will be utilized in this build?
The number 1 main weapon is a 390 Face Puncher. That's pretty much all you need in order to do the over damage cap with your action skill. All you need is any weapon with a 390 anoint. The Face Puncher just fits the bill the best because after that damage is done, it can then use that damage the best, better than anything else because it shoots melee damage. The shield that I use a lot of the time, I switch between 2 different shields. It's either a Brawler's Ward, which I keep at level 1, or a Stinger Shield, which is the melee Nova Shield. And the reason for the Brawler's Ward being level 1, which if you did not know, if you want to get a level 1 item in this game, all you have to do is kill, let's say I kill Grave Ward, he drops the Brawler's Ward. Don't pick up the Brawler's Ward, save and quit, it'll go to your lost loot. Then you join a friend's game as a level 1 character, go to Sanctuary, open up the lost loot, and all of the gear that dropped will be level 1. So pretty simple to get actually, but a Brawler's Ward has the passive 300% melee damage while shield is depleted. Even at level 1, at level 65, it's still 300%. So your shield is going to get depleted really, really easily, especially with the driver dot. The driver dot, 1 grasp of the driver dot will decrease your shield. There's only 142 capacity. So you're going to driver dot, you're instantly going to get 300% melee damage while your shield is depleted, plus 25% weapon damage, and you're also going to be getting max health regen. And with that Brawler's Ward, I wear a bonus damage anointment for the extra damage on Groundbreaker.
Awesome.
The grenade that I use is the fish slap grenade. The only grenade in the game that does melee damage. I don't actually ever throw grenades really on Amara. She doesn't need grenades, honestly. Right. But if you were to pick a grenade, the fish slap would be the best one because it's another tool to proc Groundbreaker, and it just synergizes really well.
Which you can't get anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, you can't get anymore. So if you don't have a fish slap, I recommend using Its Piss. It's a plus 20% damage increase whenever you hit a target with it. So it's real nice if you can't get one. And I don't really throw grenades anyways, so it's just a bad habit when I play Amara. She doesn't need them. The pair that I use is if I'm using a Phasegrasp comm, I always use a stone white elephant. Stone is you can get it in any element. So I'll carry like a cryo stone, a fire stone, a shock stone, whatever I'm going against, I will like equip. If I know I'm going against Wotan, I'll wear a corrosive stone, white elephant, for example, because he's armored. And I'll wear the corrosive stone with the Phasegrasp class mod. And then if I'm using driver, which is our bossing main damage setup, I will use a driver with an elemental projector. I know this is the first time in 2 months that he's been over, because he does this when I'm streaming. And then I literally took him for a walk like 10 minutes before we started this. You look very raggedy right now. It's okay, Yoshi.
Oh. Your dog's name's Yoshi?
Yoshi, yeah.
Oh.
You're tired. Yeah, sorry for the barking. For the bossing setup, we use the driver with the elemental projector, white elephant. Both artifacts for both setups using white elephants, but the only thing that's switching is that this stone versus the elemental projector. Elemental projector, better for bossing, and works with the driver, because when you use the driver, you're going to self-dot. Elemental projector gives you increased damage with the element that you are suffering. So we dot ourselves. For example, if I'm going to shoot at Graveward, I would dot myself with fire. That elemental projector is going to give me 108% damage increase with fire damage. And then those white elephants will then can get that extra damage on top of it as well.
Wow, that's awesome. Would you say there are any specific roles that you consider ideal as class-specific passives on the mod?
Absolutely. So the things that you want to keep an eye out for are melee damage and splash damage. Those are the two best things to scale our damage off of. And both of those will scale pretty much everything that we're doing. The other thing that's just kind of a nice quality of life thing is either action skill damage or action skill cooldown rate. Both will directly impact the flow, and having those things, while not essential, are nice to have.
Would that multiply your trillions of damage as well?
Yeah, it's on top of all that stuff.
Sweet. Okay, so what artifact do you use?
Artifacts, elemental projector white elephant for bossing, and stone white elephants for mobbing.
And whatever element stone you would like to just match to the enemies that you're fighting against.
Yeah, I usually keep a few on. You can also use a stone static charge. The static charge works interestingly with the face puncher. It says like when you slide, it'll charge up your next melee attack. But when you're using the face puncher, every single shot out of it creates electric chains with the static charge. So it turns your face puncher into a brainstormer. And that also works really, really well for mobbing as well.
Sweet. That's a great tip. Awesome. Thank you. What grenade mod do you use?
I use the fish slap, but it's not necessary. It's just the best in slot. But none of the things that we're doing are hinging on you throwing your grenade. It's just a quality of life thing to have. However, if you do not have that, because you can no longer get one, the Its Piss.
All right. Sweet. And where can we get the Its Piss?
I believe in Conrad's Hold, that's where there was a shift with the expanding of the dedicated drops. That's where it used to drop. I believe it still drops there. Conrad's Hold from Slaw.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, and what shield? You said you use a level 1 shield. Is that the shield that you use all the time, or just
pretty much all the time? It's the only shield that you need to use. I say that I use the Stinger shield as like a convenience thing sometimes. It's just in this build that I've demonstrated that you could take off everything except for your class mod and your artifact. Your grenade and shield, you'll still one-shot all the bosses that you're already one-shotting. So like these are just things that are nice to have on top. Brawler's Ward is just way more damage on top of everything else. And the Stinger shield is going to give you melee novas, which just help you kill things more. Both are not needed, but those are the two best things to have. Whether you're going for max damage with the Brawler's Ward for single targets, or just a nice melee nova that'll hit everything around you, kill you everything anyways, is also nice to have.
So Brawler's Ward level 1, Stinger shield level 65.
Yep. Yeah.
Sweet. Thank you. Will this build work if you don't have the proper weapons and gear yet?
No. No. This is a end game build, and you will do a ton of damage. And how I explain it to people asking that are looking to get into the build is there are builds. I have a build called Chaos Queen that I recommend for farming up the Mayhem levels until you get to Mayhem 10, and then going for something like this, because it does need a few specific requirements. But once you're there, it's the hardest hitting Mara build that I've come across.
Awesome. So there's not really anything that you could use until you have the optimal loot. You mentioned before, like a 390 weapon could maybe stand in the place.
390 will definitely help. One thing that is cool about this build is all you need is that 390. When you're trying to progress from Mayhem 0 to Mayhem 10, you're getting action skill scaling and melee scaling. So you're actually, with the exact same setup, you're just going to hit for less damage on Mayhem 0. So if you're looking for a build that, like, if you wanted to do this, you could just turn it up to Mayhem 10. All you need is a 390 weapon. You'll grass things, you'll insta-kill them on Mayhem 10 without really any gear. But getting that 390 face puncher is just icing on top.
Yeah, it's a really great gun. What Guardian rank talent should players focus on to get the most bonus stats for this build?
Groundbreaker. Absolutely Groundbreaker. It is the last talent in the red tree, which is another reason why I kind of say this is more of a build that you want to focus on once you're at endgame with Amara, because the Groundbreaker is a really great part of this build. It is not absolutely needed, but it adds so much to everything that we're doing that using it without is just not as good.
Okay. And that's what, 100 points, I think, to get into that?
125.
125. Goodness.
Yeah.
All right. And what Guardian rank talents, if any, should a player disable to use this build?
The only one that you could consider disabling is Shield Reboot. Depending on the shield you're using. If you're using the Brawler's Ward, you're going to get more bonus out of it if it's depleted. Shield Reboot, killing an enemy triggers shield regeneration. You don't really want that when using the Brawler's Ward. So if you wanted to disable that, you can. The dot from Driver will keep your shield depleted anyways, though. So it's not that big of a deal. But if there was one thing that I'd point to, you could disable that.
Great. When spending a Guardian token, what are the stats players should focus on spending their tokens to obtain for maximum min-max potential?
Melee damage, elemental damage, action skill cooldown, and that's about it.
Fantastic. Those seem essential for sure. Bounty of Blood introduced 3 new talents in the Guardian rank tree: Groundbreaker, Dead Man Walking, and Letter Alive. I'm going to ask, but I think I already know the answer. If you had to pick one to focus on getting first for this build, which would it be?
Definitely Groundbreaker.
Yeah.
definitely Groundbreaker.
All right. Are there any Mayhem modifiers that one should keep an eye out for that will enhance this build?
Speed Demon, I use that on pretty much every build. Just having movement speed is great. The fact that one of the setups for this build scales your damage off of part of your movement speed, Speed Demon's even better for. At Speed Demons is 150 driver with mindfulness is 150 movement speed. At 300 movement speed, you're gonna get around 600% increased damage just from that setup alone. But it's really not needed once again. But Speed Demon, I also, for modifiers, there a lot of the very hard modifiers can be really frustrating to deal with a lot of the times. One of the ones that this build can get away with is the minus 75% crit, just because it's already doing so much damage. And a lot of that damage we're doing through Ties That Bind. Ties That Bind is an action skill. It'll never crit. None of that damage is ever crit damage. So you're not really taking that much of a loss for it. However, it is noticeable for bossing. So I don't use it that much, but it is very doable to rock minus 75% crit and totally get away with it.
Now, isn't the white elephant the one that gives you the extra damage with the face puncher? Doesn't that crit?
That does crit, yeah.
Okay, so you would be taking a deficit there, and the white elephant would kind of be moot at that point, right?
It's still hitting for millions and millions, even with that minus 75% crit. So for the most damage, it's obviously not ideal, but it is something that this build can get away with because a lot of the other options, Death Skulls, Roguelite, I don't like the immunity drones. They just kind of bother me.
I was going to ask, what are some mayhem modifiers that you would completely avoid?
Like
probably any of the immunities.
The Dazed and Infused one is kind of annoying. I'm not a huge fan of that one.
Yeah.
I wouldn't use Holy Crit because Holy Crit a lot of the damage that we're doing isn't crit damage. So Holy Crit decreases damage of non-crits. So I wouldn't recommend that. There's a one that gives damage reduction to any damage. I don't like using that one. Other than that, they're all pretty good. Oh, I also wouldn't recommend the one that gives plus 25% damage, but increases weapon spread. Big kick. You want to be accurate with your face puncher, and having big spread on it's not as ideal.
Fair, cool. Thank you. How'd you test this build?
It was a lot of going to the very beginning area where you have those little skags and starting with no points. And I knew that it was achievable to get this crazy damage when you had full skills, but I literally just spent a ton of hours just going in and putting let's see if this increases the damage and by how much, until basically that video that I was showing was with a white shield or a white gun, and figuring out what was absolutely essential for this interaction to happen and what was just stuff on top of it. And at the end of the day, having those stacks of 2 arm for increased action skill damage laid bare and a 390 weapon with Revelation is all you need. Passives and extra gear are great to have, but there isn't that much that's absolutely required, because by your action skill alone, you're just going to be doing so much damage.
Sweet. What were some of the initial impressions that you had when you tested this build?
I was freaking out.
Did you have the help of your stream to tell you how much damage you were doing?
Yeah, the stream could look through EchoCast to see the damage, and it was we just one-shot this enemy. What else could we go do? And every single thing was just dying. What was the progression quickly.
There? Who did you go to next?
I think of Wendigo as the cream of the crop. This enemy is beefy. If we can one-shot Wendigo. This was before DLC 4, because there's some beefy enemies in DLC 4. But if we could one-shot Wendigo, that would be very good. And we did. And I was like, we absolutely got something here. And then we one-shot Wotan split on True Takedown. So both the top half and the bottom half died in one shot.
Wow.
Good stuff. Those kind of things make for good YouTube videos.
For sure. Oh my God. What did the numbers look like compared to similar builds? Both ones that you have crafted and ones you've seen other community members display.
Well, it's kind of weird because like when you're doing the most damage, you don't actually see any numbers with this build because damage cap just doesn't show, which is unfortunate because I really wish it did. But it is kind of satisfying just watching like an enemy vaporize and there's no number. You're just like, oh, okay.
And he's dead.
I guess that was damage cap. But the damage numbers they make me very happy.
Yeah.
And
that's awesome. That's so cool that you have a way to test it and you can do it on stream live with your community. It's pretty awesome.
Absolutely. Makes for some really awesome, exciting moments.
Yeah, for sure. And definitely good for YouTube as well. Because you can show people exactly how much damage you were doing, which you couldn't do if you weren't streaming. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Do you feel that there are any changes that Gearbox could make to the game that would further refine this build without making it drastically over or underpowered? I can't say that without laughing because like it's so overpowered already.
It's funny because they actually issued a patch in the patch that came with DLC 4. There was a change that was literally directly targeted at this build that stated that damage through ties that bind, there was certain types of damage that shouldn't be going through ties that bind, and they said that they were changing that to only gun and melee damage would be passing through ties that bind, which this build's main thing that it passes through ties that bind is action skill damage. It's like on top of itself. You're doing action skill damage, but it's going through your action skill. So that when I read that, I was like, this is a direct target to this build, which wouldn't be the first time. As the last time I was on the show, I showed off Ricochet Witch, the recursion.
Rip.
So I was like, oh man, and that actually tested it out and nothing's changed. I don't know if that'll be back, but at the moment that patch didn't change anything, any interaction with ties that bind. So
fingers crossed.
Still good for now, yeah.
They did just say that they're going to roll out patches at a slower rate, so hopefully. Oh no! Show that again. Oh my God. Oh no.
This is my recursion tombstone.
Oh. So do you wish that they'd improve damage number displays so you could see your billions and trillions of damage?
Yeah, absolutely. Having that number pop up, or like in photo mode, if you could like pop photo mode damage numbers and it would almost give you like a log of like all the damage that you did, that would be really cool, because a lot of times I'm just like zooming in and trying to find the number that was done, and just having like a record of the damage numbers would be really cool. Or I believe it was Borderlands 2, if you hit for damage cap, it was like 9999999 like M or K, instead of just no number popping up, if it was like 999 million or something like that, so you knew that like damage cap was just reached, because sometimes you don't even notice it and the enemy just evaporates and you're like, that was a lot. I don't know how much, but it was a lot. But yeah, right now the only really way to see it is EchoCast, which is unfortunate because like I'm able to do that with my audience, but if you were not streaming this, you really can't tell, because if something dies, it doesn't matter if it died for 1.5 million damage or 300 billion. You can't tell the difference.
Wow. Well, we're fortunate to have EchoCast anyway. Oh my God, is that it? No, we're already at the end. Dude, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was so awesome.
Thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun. I love talking about this stuff.
This has been great. Like, it's so cool to see all the cool things that you do with Amara. I know she's your favorite character, and I hope they don't nerf you again. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Oh, you got your Amara. Nice.
Yay.
That's fantastic. I actually got an Amara in the mail as well, so I still have her in the box though, because I'm a nerd. Okay, so is there maybe a build that you can take 15 seconds to tease for your next appearance? Perhaps something pertaining to terror, because Bloody Harvest is hopefully right around the corner.
Ooh, terror. I made a gas call grenade Amara build back in the day that was very, very cool, that I'd be interested to see the changes of how it works now with that grenade's got mayhem scaling.
Yeah.
Very, very cool.
Was it a Vindicator gas call?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The best one.
Yeah. Back in the day, you could throw a few grenades and with all of Amara's silly interactions that scale damage so well, murder everything. It's a lot of fun. So I'd be really, really excited. I know it's coming up, but they haven't even teased anything about it.
I know.
Anything. So
I had a terror build for far too long. But I love terror. I thought it was really fun to be able to get that extra damage.
And the Fearmonger, amazing weapon.
Oh, so yeah.
His shotgun.
That was a great gun. Unfortunately, I have a lot of those still on an alt character I have not gotten rid of. So hopefully they'll be a level 65 at this point. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on the show. And thank you, Moxsy, for being here. This has been so cool.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a blast.
And
always happy to come back.
Oh, my God. You're so sweet. Thank you so much for being here. Where can we find you on the internet?
Twitter handle, MoxsyOG. YouTube, Moxsy. Twitch.tv/Moxsy on the Twitch, Instagram, MoxsyOG, and that's all the places.
Can you spell Moxsy for those of us who are listening?
Moxsy, not to be confused with the much prettier, cooler Moxsy in Borderlands.
Okay, well, if you've ever wanted to see Amara do her best World Breaker impression, look no further than Game Breaker Amara. While I think at this point it goes without saying, it is still my duty to reiterate this simple sentiment. Moxsy, you are truly an ultimate vault hunter.
Thank you very much.
Psycho Krieg and the Fantastic Fustercluck is out now, so give Game Breaker Amara a try and let us know the results via your favorite social media platform. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you in 2 weeks on Thursday, October 15th on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and SoundCloud at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific. If you'd like more details about this build, you can find a link to more information and the build in the podcast description section. Happy looting to all you Ultimate Vault Hunters out there.